Just a heads up, I'm sticking a big old context warning here. Viewer digression is advised. How can you describe a game like Mouthwashing? Horror? Certainly. Walking sim? It has more puzzles than just walking, so I don't really think that counts. Bizarre? Sure. Amazing? Without a doubt in my mind. When my friend first recommended the game to me, I did not know what I was getting myself into. I thought it would just be another quirky horror game with a PS1 aesthetic. But after playing it for myself, it is one of the best experiences I have had this year, and it needs to be experienced blind. Space itself is terrifying. It is an endless expanse that stretches beyond the edges of the universe, with a whole lot of nothing in there. So imagine being adrift in that endless, empty expanse, with no hope of rescue and no hope of saving yourself. How would you handle it? The constant dread, the creeping uneasiness, the steady annoyance of your fellow crewmates. Would you keep your head above water, trying to become like a rock for people to rest on? Or will you succumb to the torrent, losing yourself to the abyss? How will you face the end of the road? As much as people would like to say, "Ha, I will not succumb to bad thoughts, my mind is an island," you don't really know how you will react when the bad times come knocking. And games that explore that are forever fascinating to me. How will this playable character overcome these stressful situations? How would I, as the player, feel with how the character I'm playing as dealing with these situations? What if, at the end of the day, the character that I'm playing as is not a good person? Mouthwashing is a short 2 to 3 hour experience, but it is one that has burrowed itself into my brain. The moment I clicked end stream, I opened up Word and started writing this script. I need to talk about this game, and I hope you all listen, and I hope it will hurt. Mouthwashing was made by a company called Wrong Organ, whose previous game was called How Fish is Made. Both games can be found on Steam at the moment. Mouthwashing's plot is non-linear. You jump between the past, present and future, and are told bits and pieces of a plot at seemingly random times. So because of this, I'm just going to slap a big old spoiler warning here. Talking about the game is impossible without mentioning something about its plot, and this game is at its best when you don't know anything about it. Looking at the clues the game gives you and then putting them together bit by bit is honestly one of the best gaming experiences I've had this year. The game is not long either, it takes about 2 to 3 hours as I said earlier, so please play it before watching anything else in this video. I'll still be here. Okay, you played the game? Yes? Great! Let's begin. The game is based through the eyes of Curly, the ship's captain, and the eyes of Jimmy, the second in command. Curly is someone who takes everybody into account and feels the responsibility of having everybody's expectation on his shoulders, while Jimmy, well, we'll get back to him. They are both pilots of the space freighter that is destined to crash and leave the crew stuck there. The game takes place both before and after this event, and the game shows you snippets of what's going on. You are joined by other members of the crew. You have Anya, the ship's medic, who appears to be quite squeamish about her job. However, if you read into it a bit more, you can tell there's something deeper going on. Swansea, a rough around the edges engineer, who shares his name with a Welsh city, although I'm not too sure if that was intentional or not. And finally, you have Daisuke, the youngest member of the crew, and he's an intern for Swansea, supposedly helping with engineering jobs, although helping might be a strong word if you take Swansea's description into account. The game really makes an effort to make these characters feel more than just one note. They each feel like they've got their own dreams, their own aspirations, and they've each got their own demons that they're facing during this very hard and troubled time. So, with the introductions out the way, what kind of game is Mouthwashing? The game, at its core, is an adventure game. You pick things up to use on things. There are bits where the game deviates going for something more horror focused, but for most of the playthrough it follows a adventure game kind of mentality. You go through each section talking to people and experiencing things, And overall, the game controls really well. It uses the typical WASD movement on keyboards, interacting with things with left click, opening your inventory with tab, pretty standard fare as adventure games go. One thing that I can think of that I can count as a critique is that sometimes it's not really clear what can be interacted with and what can't. There were times I was clicking on seemingly anything, trying to figure out what it is the game wanted me to do. But that could just be because of my small goober gamer brain. Music and sound are also both fantastic here. They really help with the feeling of uneasiness. Sometimes I swear I'm hearing sounds that are not there, heaping on the paranoia as I walk down these dark hallways. Sometimes it helps to act as a warning, alerting you to footsteps or where some things are in relation to you. Other times it's there to make you feel uncomfortable, like when you feed Curly his pain medication. Go on, take your meds, Curly. Good stuff. Along with this, you have the design of the ship itself. You don't really go anywhere else in this game, it's pretty much contained in just the one ship, and they make great use of the space. Before long, you'll be able to know where to go without wandering around. It's well thought out. The visuals as well are also great. They look to be going for the PS1 style with the low poly characters and the location geometry. And the colours used really help the overall look pop out. I personally love the look of the main lounge, with the big old TV being used as mood lighting for some of the scenes, changing depending on what point in time you're in. They all use the visuals for great effect, especially when things start to become less normal. So, overall, the package itself is quite charming, and all of these are used to tell a story that is just fantastic when jumped into blind. The foreshadowing that you won't pick up until certain things come to light. Some things are only noticeable as well when you read between the lines. That being said though, the context warning at the start of the video, important. I do mean it. Be wary before watching this video. If you are still here, then I'm going to assume you're okay with me talking about these kind of things. So, if that's the case, let's begin. The game starts off with you in the cockpit, with text saying 0 days before the crash, which is a tad bit ominous, and after looking around you go to the main console and see that there's a collision about to happen with some sort of space mass, and that you should turn left to avoid it. So naturally you turn right. Okay, I did not mean to do that. Thankfully the autopilot kicks in and saves our asses, only for us to turn the autopilot off. Wait, what? So we seem to be making the situation worse for now. Let's just get out of the cockpit. Running along the corridor, it starts to shift. Rooms get repeated and sounds start to play. Some groans of the ship and what seems to be a baby crying from somewhere. After reaching what seems to be a dead end, we turn around and find this thing. And before we can contemplate what's going on, we fast forward 2 months after the crash. We are joined by the fellow crew members of the ship, talking about the situation we're in, and since they need a way to get more supplies, the option of opening the cargo hold and seeing what's there comes to mind. Swansea shoots down the idea. He has that money grind set, you see, and does not want us opening the cargo hold getting in the way of his fat stacks of money. But we're the captain now, so we can just sidestep where he thinks and do what we want. Speaking of captains, if you go into the medical bay, you can see Curly on the bed, the previous captain, who seems to have flown the ship into the space mass, starting this whole mess. What seems to have happened is, after the impact of the space mass, the ship, for lack of a better word, foamed up, which is why there's so much foam everywhere. However, this means that some areas of the ship are inaccessible because there's a massive wall of foam in the way, like with what's going on with utility. As Swansea said, it's just one giant wall of foam. Speaking to Anya, who's also medical, she asks if you can give Curly his pain meds, because apparently the noise that he makes is that horrific she can't do it herself. We push back a bit at first, but ultimately agree to do it. It is worth noting that before Jimmy agrees to give Curly his pain medication, it does make quite a mean-spirited remark towards Anya. After giving Curly his pain meds, we check up on Anya again, where she asks why did he do it? Why did he pilot the ship into the space mass, dooming everybody to suffer with him? And then says, I have to believe that our worst moments don't make us monsters. Jimmy points out that he tried to take everyone down with him and that everybody only wants to keep him alive for one reason or another. So because of this dialogue, we can deduce that the person we were playing as at the beginning of the game was Curly, setting the ship onto the collision course which set the events of this game into motion. After checking the cockpit and getting the code scanner, we make our way down to the cargo hold, where we can finally see what's actually in there. What are we carrying across the vast reaches of space? Only for us to be taken 7 days before the crash. Anya's doing a psychological evaluation on the team as part of a routine checkup to make sure no one's going down the deep end. And we're back to playing as Curly by the looks of it. There's only one more evaluation to do, which is Jimmy's, and it doesn't seem to be taking things that seriously. So we go talk to him, only to hear that there's some issues in the utility room, and, as we are the captain, it's on us to fix it. Looks like Daisuke's all foamed up after trying to get into a busted air vent. Helping Daisuke out of his foaming issue, we go back to checking Jim's psych evaluation, but he wants to do it in the cockpit for some reason. So we make our way there and... I don't think we're on the ship anymore. As you wander this red, watery landscape, ladders start sprouting up from the water. Eventually, sirens will start blaring out, and warning signs will pop out from seemingly nowhere. Finally, the scene ends with what looks to be Bahamut's attack from Final Fantasy XIV engulfing the entire area. And, before you can question what's going on, you're back in the cockpit. After making our way out of that Evangelion episode, we finally meet up with Jimmy, and the two start to have a little chat about how things are. Curly expresses having doubts about his position in life, wondering if his current job is enough for him. Sure, he's successful, but is that all he can do? Has he hit that glass ceiling, so to speak? The uncertainty of trying something new, not knowing if he'll pass or fail at it. Is it worth risking it all to see if it'll work, or should he just stick to what he knows? Jimmy points out that he has reached the top of his ladder, nowhere else to go, and that there are many other ladders out there. Either way, it's a ways down, and after their heart-to-heart, they get a letter sent to them from corporate, and before we can read it, we are sent to... some place. Looks to be the cargo hold, but there's a big old CRTV in there. We start to flick through some of the channels, seeing all sorts of shows, up until we come across an advert for some mouthwash. And then we go back to 2 months after the crash. Turns out, the cargo that we have is mouthwash. All the boxes, mouthwash. We can't even use it for medical reasons as there's too much sugar content in it to actually disinfect anything. Swansea, however, decides, you've got nothing better to do, and starts drinking it. Don't drink mouthwash, kids. It's not good for you. So the situation is turning pretty dire, resorting to mouthwash as some sort of alcohol substitute. Before everyone breaks down to despair, however, we're sent back to 6 days before the crash. Our objective here is to break the news to the team, and, guessing by Curly's thoughts when you highlight the letter on the tab screen, it's not good news. However, before we can ruin everybody's day, it's time for a birthday party. Yours to be exact. After walking around and making a cake, because for some bizarre reason the captain's the only one who can do that, you then break the news to the crew, and understandably they're not too happy with the news. However, Jimmy seems to go out of his way to paint Curly as this evil individual. He really digs into him and just puts more and more pressure on. It's a hard scene to watch. And after we cut some cake, we're flung back into the future. We wake up and decide to go for a stroll. This groaning noise going on throughout the ship. Going to check on Curly, we don't know if he's been given his meds. So, off we go to find Anya. We find Anya and Swansea both talking in the cockpit. We don't know what they're talking about, but whatever it is, it seems to be making Anya cry. Anya mentions that she hasn't given Curly his pain medication yet, so we offer to do it instead. And we go up to see Curly. Jimmy makes some comments about what everyone is thinking, also mentioning something Anya will do. Not too sure what's going on in Jimmy's headspace at the moment, but anyway. Give Curly his pain meds, a bit aggressively this time by the sounds of it. And suddenly we're in the lobby with Curly. Since there's nothing else for us to do, we sit down next to our slightly overcooked friend and have a chat. Decide what's going on. He just really wants to have some really bad cake with his friend. So, we oblige. Only issue is, there's no knife around here, so off we go to find one. Looking around, we can't find a knife, however we have this axe. Not quite the same as a knife, but close enough, right? Why does it say feast? Why are there eyeballs all over the screen? Why is Curly on the table? What are we doing with that axe? Fast forward to 4 months after the crash. We find Daisuke on the floor having one too many mouthwashes. Anya herself is thinking about drinking it just because there's nothing else that we can do. But before that, she mentions that there's a medicine cabinet that should be easy enough to get to if we can just get rid of some of the foam. However, slight issue with that, Swansea has the axe. Because of this, we need to talk to him and ask if we can borrow it off him. However, just look at him. Look at those vibes, look at those moves. He is one of that axe. Who are we to get in the way of that? Anyway, we ask him for the axe, and he helps by lodging it into the big screen behind him, shattering the screen. Looks like after 4 months, MirrROR has taken a very quick nosedive. Swans is being very abrupt to Jimmy, almost aggressive, almost like he doesn't like him that much, like he did something to make him feel that way. Anyway, no point thinking about it. Axe collected, foam wall removed, medicines received. Speaking to Anya, she asks you to give Curly the painkillers that you've found, and Jimmy starts to moan about being asked to do things. It's almost like he's the captain of the ship, and with that has responsibilities. But what do I know? When we go up to Curly to give him the meds, Jimmy expresses that he didn't understand the responsibility that being a captain entailed, and then we're sent 6 hours until Judgement. We're stuck in the cockpit, and Swansea is trying to get in, a bit aggressively. So we barricade the door, only for him to smash it, and then we're flung back 2 days before the crash. Curly's talking to Anya. Anya can't seem to sleep. She first asks how long do we have left on the trip, which is about 8 months. She then asks, why does Pony Express put a lock on the medical room, but not on the sleeping quarters? We say that maybe it's for safety, but before we can divulge any further into that, we're then flung into 5 months after the crash. Daisuke comes up running to Jimmy and says Anya is trapped in medical and needs our help. So we make our way there, only to find out that Anya's actually locked the door on the inside. The door's not jammed, she's just keeping it locked. Jimmy says that she can't keep breaking down after each little hardship, which, as you can imagine, does not go down well. She goes on to say how Jimmy was right and that she should have done this a long time ago, which does not sound good at all. Trying to find a way in, the busted air vent from before comes into play. It's dangerous, but it's the only way in. However, Swansea is not letting us in there, so now what? Before we can think up a plan, we're then sent 8 hours until Judgement. When we spawn in, we see Daisuke's on the floor with a gaping wound. I'm guessing the air vent plan didn't go too well. It's okay though. Jimmy will fix everything somehow, as he keeps saying he always does. First, we need to disinfect the wound, but the medical alcohol that was in the medicine cabinet from before was used on something, we don't quite know what. Making our way to the cargo hold, it's looking a bit different. For this segment, we're trying to get to the end of the cargo bay, but something is stopping us. If we make too much noise, it will get us and send us back to the start. Walking makes noise. Running makes a lot of noise. So you need to pay attention to where the monster is, walking when it's far, not moving at all when it's right underneath you. The monster, by the way, is some gigantic monstrous pony. I'm guessing all that time on the Pony Express is really starting to take its toll on Jimmy's mental state. But making our way through the maze, we go to the end where we find mouthwash. But we shouldn't use it as disinfectant though, right? Anya said so herself. The sugar content is far too high. Oh, you're just going to do it anyway. Okay, cool. We were then sent back to before Daisuke went into the vents. We need to find a way to knock out Swansea. What better way to get someone knocked out than with alcohol? And we have this disinfectant alcohol. Oh, god damn it, Jimmy. So we make a scuffed cocktail, which Swansea takes, but not before giving Daisuke a talking to. One thing that I feel like needs to be said is the alcohol itself says that if someone drinks it, it could cause serious harm. However, Jimmy doesn't seem to care about that. So he drinks the cocktail and passes out on the floor. But hey, at least we finally have the key to utility, and making our way in there, we find that it's been kind of unaffected by the foam, which is strange since Swansea said that it's like a wall of foam early on in the game. But looking at it now, it looks relatively unaffected. So what's going on? What has Swansea been doing all by himself if the room has not been touched? There's one cryostasis pod that is untouched and usable, and can keep someone alive in there for about 20 years. So, according to Jimmy, It looks like Swansea's been keeping one of these pods a secret for some reason. Jimmy's mind goes straight to, he's waiting for us all to die and jump in the pod to save himself. However, we can't really ask him questions since he's knocked out on the floor. So, not much we can do right now. Let's send Daisuke up into the vent. Looking at it, and to be honest, I don't like Daisuke's chances in there, and I'd think that even if we don't know what happens in the future. But Jimmy says it must be done, so he goes in and... Yep. Good job, Jimmy. We're then flung one day before the crash. Okay, back to playing as Curly, and what are we doing now? What do you mean, find the gun? We find Anya having what looks to be a breakdown in the cockpit. Talking to her, Curly realizes that while Anya has been giving the team psych evaluations, no one has been giving her one. Curly says that he would help her if she told him, as the crew are his responsibility. To that, Anya responds that she's pregnant. Now, remember when she says that the bedroom doors are not locked? She didn't want that gun to hurt herself, she wanted it to defend herself. Think back to when all the beds were in the lounge. Notice how Anya's bed is right in front of the pony statue, which makes noises when it detects movement. I feel like I don't need to paint a picture of what happened. The game is very apparent of what happened to Anya, and by the looks of it, Cody knows who did it as well without Anya saying anything. So that means he either knew what happened and did nothing, or he has an idea on who did it and still chooses to do nothing. Either way, Curly's in the wrong. It's disgusting behaviour, and if we take everything into account, we can kind of figure out who did the disgusting act already. But on the off chance people don't know, I will wait until the game outright states it before saying anything. We leave the room and we're back to a bleeding Daisuke, and Swansea decides to take him out as a gesture of mercy. Jimmy's saying that he could have fixed it, but Swansea's taking none of it, and states that it's the end of the line for all of them. Taking Daisuke out was an act of mercy. We accuse Swansea of plotting something to save himself, telling Anya things to make it unhinged, only for Swansea to say, "Oh, we did talk, but it was her telling me all sorts of things instead." We go to find the gun from earlier, and checking medical, we see that Anya has taken her own life. The stress of what she has gone through is still going through, being trapped in a small ship adrift in space with the very person who abused you. It all got too much and she overdoses on painkillers. The gun case is nearby, getting the code from the cockpit. We open the safety box to get the gun, and Cody starts to laugh at us, finally acknowledging that Anya was right about how much of a monster Jimmy actually is, and realizing that it's too late for him to do anything. All he can do is watch. And Swansea, finally fed up with Jimmy, starts to rush him with the axe. And then we're back to day 0, the day of the crash, where we saw what looked to be Curly driving the ship into the giant space mass at the beginning of the game. Curly talks to Anya, who says that she told the person who was her that she is pregnant, to which Curly just goes, "I was going to do that, why didn't you ask?" which is not the best response out there. We go to the cockpit and see Jimmy is there, waiting for us. We talk to Jimmy, saying how we will fix this. Jimmy is asking what will happen to him when he gets back to Earth, and Jim starts to shift the blame onto Curly, saying that he said he'll keep everything under control. It was his responsibility. Jimmy says he can make it all disappear and walks off to the cockpit while Curly watches. Curly is dazed and starts to run to the cockpit while warning signs are blaring. We see Jimmy sitting down panicking. We then rush to the driver's seat and then... What kind of character is Jimmy? At first, you think he's just someone who was put into the driver's seat because the captain drove too close to some sort of space mass. But the more you play, the more layers get peeled away. He keeps saying he will fix things, but makes them worse. He belittles Anya and the rest of the crew constantly. He Anya on top of that. When people try to push against him and try to suggest another path forward, he ignores them or tries to force them to do what he says. He blames everybody else for what is happening, when at the end of it all, everything that's happened in this game is because of him. He is the reason the ship crashed. He is the reason for every death on that ship. He is, at his core, a selfish, manipulative, cowardly, sorry excuse for you human, and we're stuck playing as him. Think back to the beginning of the game, when you're running down the endless hallways. There seems to be a baby making noise. This links up with what Anya told him just before the crash. Curly looks at you at all times when you're near him, and during gameplay, you might think it's a little creepy addition to the game, but now, you know why that is. It's because he knows what you did. He knows that everything is your fault. Swansea's aggressiveness towards you isn't just because of his nature, it's because Anya told him what you did. He's only hateful towards you. Once the reveal is shown, suddenly everything starts to make sense. Curly, despite his mental decline, never had any clear signs he wanted to end it all. Whenever you play as him, you can tell that he cares about the crew, and that itself is his own flaw. His care about the crew as a whole is why he didn't do anything to Jimmy, as it could have caused issues down the line. However, he should have dissented the brig. Hell, he should have sent them out of the airlock, but instead he tried to play mediator and figure out a way in which everybody gets away happy, which in cases like this is just not possible. To make an analogy, dental care. Bear with me on this. If you don't brush your teeth, but instead use nothing but mouthwash, sure, your mouth will smell and possibly look nice, but the grime and decay will still be there, festering, making teeth worse. It's a surface level fix. In order to make sure it's in tip-top shape, you need to get in there, brush your teeth, floss, remove all that grime. It's more work, but it's needed at the end of the day to have a healthy system. Curly did not do that. He wanted the surface level fix, and unfortunately, the rest of the crew had to pay for that mistake. Now, all we can do is take responsibility. Jimmy finds Swansea, and they have one last chat before he puts him to rest for good. Not before he calls Jimmy out for what he is, in what I think is one of the best scenes in the game. Swansea talking about how accomplishments don't feel as good as you expect when you get them, people pushing themselves for the next big thing. All of it sounds like things you hear people talking about. How often have you worked on something, only for, when it's finished, you don't feel as happy as you thought you would? Drawn something, only to think you could do better. Finish that one big project, only to feel that you need to work on the next one. All of these things that you hear people talk about is what causes burnout. Swansea's one of the best characters in the game. At first I thought he was just an ass, but the more you look into him, the more you realise that that rough outer shell is not because he hates you, it's because he hates himself. That cryopod he was looking after, it was not for him to save himself. One of my friends said that they think that Swansea would have used it on Daisuke, as he was the youngest and he did show great remorse when he killed him, which makes a lot of sense to me. Anyway, Jimmy puts him down and then continues on with the Jimmy's mental decline ride. One thing that's worth noting is during this last little nightmare segment, everybody gets a send-off. Swansea has this weird boss-like battle, Daisuke has an entire area dedicated to him with the flowers as his main motif, and Curly goes to the Burning Man. However, Anya, one of the most important characters of this game, is not mentioned at all. The pregnancy is mentioned. There's an entire area dedicated to the baby, with Jimmy having to perform an ultrasound in order to progress. But Anya is missing entirely from this last little bit of the game, which I think speaks volumes on how Jimmy saw Anya at the end of the day. He saw her as somebody not even worth remembering during his final moments. Earlier on in the game, when you're looking for disinfectant to help Daisuke, if you look into the medical wing and try and see where Anya's body is, you can't see it. It's just a massive hazy mess. It's because, at the end of the day, Jimmy doesn't really care. To him, Anya was more of an annoyance than anything. constantly shouting at her whenever an opportunity arises, constantly getting arsey whenever he gets asked to give Cody some pain medication, making jabs implying that Anya is inferior to him, when in actuality, it's because of Anya that Cody's still alive. If she wasn't there to give him the medical attention that he needed, Cody would have died the moment the ship impacted the space mass. As we progress through this nightmarish hellscape, we find Curly strapped onto a chair with valves sprouting out of his body, force feeding him some of his own leg in a puzzle that took me longer than I like to admit to understand. We walk over to a burning Curly and we talk to him. Curly says that he's taking responsibility for what happened, as no matter what happens, he'll be painted as the villain, the one that caused the crash, even if it's not true, as he could have stopped us all from the beginning. Jimmy apologizes for what he did, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. What happened still happened, people are dead, and apologizing won't give them back. Now, we find ourselves playing cat and mouse in the vents against this thing. There's a lot of horse-based monsters in this game, I've noticed. It's fairly simple. You keep moving, looking around. If you see the thing looking at you, move into another vent as quickly as you can, otherwise it's back to the beginning with you. Make enough distance and we find ourselves at the end of this ride. Jimmy puts Curly into the last cryopod and tells him that we are going home, before walking away and ending his own life. Mouthwashing is a game that is there to hurt you. It will make you feel uncomfortable, it will make you do things you don't want to do, and it will make it hurt. And that is why it's one of my favourite games that came out this year. I was so happy that I was able to experience this with no outside influence. There was no expectations laid before me when I started it. All I got was a, you should play this. It's the best way to play this game, blind. If you watched a video and said or read online what happens, you're robbing yourself of one of the best experiences out there. Watching it is not the same, because it's not you doing the actions, it's somebody else. Reading it robs you of the visuals that the game throws at you. Playing it is the best way to experience this. At the end of my first playthrough, it took roughly just over 2 hours. The VOD is up on the VOD channel now, and it's one of those games that's just stuck in my head since. Every now and then I think back to a scene, realise there's something new about it. It's hard to encapsulate why this game rates so high for me. There's just something about how raw it all feels. The way the story is told in these segmented sections, leaving you to put the pieces back together yourself. The game might be a bit too much for people though. I put that warning at the beginning of the video for a reason, as some of these themes might be a bit too much for people who are victims of such horrible acts. And please don't think for a second that I'm saying it's not okay to feel that way. Everyone has their own limits and that's perfectly fine. But for now, all we can do is wash out the taste of this experience out of our mouths. So, does anybody have any mouthwash? Hello again, thanks for watching this video. The topics for this video were a bit dark and I do hope that I've done them justice. However, if there is any feedback, please don't be shy in sharing it. In the meantime, as I mentioned before, there is a VOD channel with my entire first playthrough of this on there. I also have a Twitter and Blue Sky if you want to hear more of my ramblings. I also stream on Twitch every Monday and Friday, unless real life gets in the way. And yeah, like, comment and subscribe, it does help the channel out a lot. Thanks again to all 160 of you that have subscribed already, you are fantastic people, and I'll see you all for the next video. See ya!